this morning I was chatting with a recent survivor of narcissistic abuse. She had just recently left a toxic relationship and was in incredible pain. It'd been 3 weeks out and she was still really hurting, and she was wanting to know from those of us who have been further on our journey, when does the pain stop? That brought me back and it reminded me of some recent lessons that I've learned in this healing process, things that I didn't know. You'd think that you would know. You think as a psychologist, right? I mean, that's my training, was to understand everything related to mental health and healing and recovery and all of this. But it's amazing to me how poorly we educate our children, how poorly educated we are on how to handle emotions. We often are unprepared for the intensity, and when we encounter it, we want it to stop. And what we often don't know is that the way in which what we do to get it to stop often is the wrong things. It sets us back, it delays us, it maybe even hinders the healing. We don't help our healing. We could actually possibly hinder the healing. So so I thought I'd start today with talking about how do we actually heal? What is emotional recovery, trauma recovery look like, especially when you're in that raw bleeding stage where you can't stop thinking about the narcissistic ex. You're angry that they've moved on and they're already posting pretty pictures of themselves on social media. You feel like your life is in shambles. Maybe your relationship with your kids is not in the best place. You may be financially strapped and you're scared. You're literally scared because you don't know how this person's going to come after you and how long it's going to take and what a mess your life may or may not be. It's a horrible spot. It's one of the worst places I think I've ever been in my life. I mean, I've suffered some pretty catastrophic things, and I would have to say this is right up there. I heard someone just recently liken it to an addiction withdrawal. I can't attest to that because I've not struggled with that, so I don't know what it feels like. But I wouldn't be surprised if recovering from narcissistic abuse, if the healing and that first stage when we've been discarded, or even when we're the ones walking out, I wouldn't be surprised if it's similar to an addiction withdrawal. So let me give you some advice about how to help this what we often don't know, and what we often think is, we think it's almost like bad advice because it's so painful. And so let me make some suggestions on healing. And before I do that, I'm going to stop and introduce myself. I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy. I'm a licensed clinician with over 20 years of counseling experience. And these days, I primarily promote health, healing, and wholeness about relationship health through TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and other places. I also have a podcast called Breaking Free Narcissistic Abuse that drops episodes every Monday morning and Thursday morning. So there's a new episode today that looks at, if narcissists are born or made that way, is it wrong for us to hold them responsible? So that's what today's podcast is about. But today I wanted to talk about emotional healing for us, because I know the people who come to these lives are individuals who are trying to get better, and that this is something that's actively on our mind. And in order to interact with me, and I will pause at some point when I get done with explaining some things, I want to give you some tips, but put your thumbs up ahead of the comment. That helps me to know that I'm talking to you. Unfortunately, Instagram, I can't see your comments, so I'm not going to be able to interact with Instagram, but I'm thrilled that Instagram people are here and following me. I really love that you're here, but I noticed. Thank you, guys. I've noticed that. I don't know what to do. It started this, and then I discovered my lash is half off, and I could just go ahead and take them off and call it good. But anyway, don't you hate that? Nothing like, anyway, so now I know my makeup is not perfect, and I probably don't have good eyeliner, but oh, well, thank you for the embarrassing moments of streaming live, all those things that happen here. Anyway, we're here, I'm here, we're all good. We all love each other, right? And we all know we're human. And thank you for saying I look like Princess Kate. It's really appreciate that. All right, so back to this. I was hoping you guys wouldn't notice. I could feel it was half off, and I kept thinking, I don't know if they can see over the glasses or not, but apparently you can. So anyway, thank you for the warning. I appreciate that. It's off. Yes, and so put your thumbs up ahead of the comments. That way I know you're talking to me. Like I said, Instagram, I can't see the comments. I'm blind. And I did, Zaza, I saw your question. You want the narcissist back. So I'll weave that in. And if you've noticed, I have subscribers live. So Brittany, who's Thriving in the Afternoon, is she's a moderator here, but she's also one of my subscribers. And I know I get into monologues and I don't see the comments that are happening when they're happening, but I try to go back and see it. So if you're a subscriber and I missed it, please repeat it. But subscribers, questions and comments come to the top of the line. So if you want me to see it and make sure I get there, I also am going to be taking questions from you. So you need to DM me, and I follow subscribers. So subscribers, I follow you back. So you can DM me on TikTok, DM me on Instagram, or email me at hello@Kerry McAvoy PhD. And then every live, I will take one of your questions, and at least one of your questions, and talk about it so that you make sure your questions get addressed. So let's go back to healing after narcissistic abuse, especially in that first phase when you feel raw and you find you have a whole myriad of feelings. Like Zaza just said, you want the narcissist back, but yet you know you just suffered something horrific and you're feeling crazy, because that would be idiotic and everybody would look at you and wonder what's wrong with you, and you're wondering what's wrong with you. What is going on? Why is this period so incredibly painful? It's a difficult period because our life is in a massive adjustment. When we're in a narcissistic abusive relationship, that relationship has very much defined, given structure to everything about our lives. It has defined how we're interacting with money. Our social support system has changed. Even how we're spending time has changed. I know for me, what we watched on TV, our leisure activity, even what we ate changed. Everything changed because the narcissist is literally like the sun. They become the center of the world, and you are like a satellite around this sun. You're gravitating your life around this person. And in order to keep things from being volatile and tumultuous and to avoid all the conflict, you then begin to modify everything about yourself. You essentially recreate yourself when you're in this relationship. So when you step out, you've lost who you were originally, and you don't really know who that is. In fact, maybe that person, I know for me, who I was before I met the narcissist died. I could feel her dying, that my innocence was destroyed. My sense of the world was essentially a good place was broken. My trust was shattered. I felt like I'd severely betrayed myself. I felt the person that I had, that even the person that was widowed, that was surviving the loss of my first marriage, and that was a very, very painful place. I felt like she was gone. And I didn't really know who this new person was. And I didn't even know if I wanted to be this new person, or I liked her, or where I was going to go. I mean, I had all these myriads of questions, but I at least knew what was familiar, even though it wasn't good with what happened. I mean, it was terrible. What happened with the narcissist was terrible. It was familiar. It provided structure, and I understood the rules of it. So part of the pull is, not only are we missing the dopamine hit, the oxytocin that we had, that's kind of the bonding, cuddling emotions, all the rush, the adrenaline rush that we would get when we're scared, then it would turn out all right. Yes, there's this myriad of emotions or hormones that are happening and chemicals that are happening. They're very toxic and very addicting. But in addition to that, your sense of self has been shattered, and you don't really have a new replacement. So part of the pull back is to go back to at least something that you understood and you knew the rules of, even if it was bad. It's better. I mean, the weird part about humans is that if you're faced with three options, and they found this with attention, and I believe this happens everywhere on everything. If you have the option to be admired and respected, good attention, wonderful attention, or to be in conflict, be thought of as a horrible person, bad attention, versus no attention, being invisible, being not seen at all, Believe it or not, the way we're going to rank order those of importance, we want the positive attention, obviously, that's the best, but we'll settle for negative attention over nothing at all. We don't like nothing at all. So I think this is the same for our sense of structure and our sense of self. At least we knew who we were in the narcissistic abusive relationship. It was bad, but at least we knew who we were. We no longer are who we used to be. And now we're in a place of lostness with nothing at all. And that feels absolutely miserable. So we would prefer the bad to the nothing. Isn't that weird? But that's the way we work. So what I would recommend, let me give you some suggestions, and then I'm going to leap in and start taking your questions. What I would suggest, if you find yourself in this beginning throes of things, don't run away from the pain. I know that's counterintuitive. It just doesn't make sense. Don't run away from the pain. Because if you do, you're going to be doing things like addictive behavior. You're going to be dissociating. You're going to be doing all the things that get you out of and away from the pain, out of your body, out of your head. And those things don't help processing. In fact, one of the things we notice with addicts is that addicts often end up developmentally wherever they started using is where they stopped growing. So if they were 14 and started using, when they start to get in the sober and start the journey towards health, there's essentially emotionally a 14-year-old having to learn all the things that they didn't learn that they should have learned in the years that they spent using the drug. So the same for us. If we run away from the pain, we're not healing. We're delaying the process, and we're not moving ourselves through the journey. So what do you do with the pain? Because frankly, the pain is awful and it's very scary and it feels kind of overwhelming. Well, see, there's the paradox, and this is what I discovered. It isn't as bad or as big or as horrible as you think it is. It's your anticipation of it that makes it so awful. So you sit with it. When it happens, this is what I learned. You actually sit with it. You say to yourself, okay, what am I feeling? Let's put some words to it. Yeah, I'm feeling this, and I'm feeling this, and I really miss this. And don't judge yourself. I really miss the relationship. You know it's bad. I mean, you'll have this conversation with you. You know it's really bad. Don't you remember the bad? But yeah, I know it was really bad. But there was good periods too. Yeah, well, there were good periods, but it was really bad. Do you want that bad treatment back? No, I really don't want that. But damn, this really hurts. But if you kind of sit with it like that, if you sit with this and just even set a timer. That's what I would do. I would set a timer for 20 minutes and just allow yourself to experience the pain. And what you're going to discover is that it isn't the size and scope that you thought it is. It's going to be a more manageable. And you're also going to find another really odd thing that we usually don't know about feelings. Feelings are what's called state driven. They're not traits, they're states. That means they're temporary. So if you cannot sustain one feeling for a long period of time, it wears out, it disappears. So if you sit with it long enough, it starts to fade. It's when we avoid it that the pain continues because we haven't sat with it and we haven't let it extinguish itself. So I would really urge you to sit with it. Now, what do you do when you sit with it? I have mental conversations with myself, but you could journal, you could cry, you could listen to really sad music. There's all sorts of ways in which you sort of can learn to experience this. I see that Baxter Inflame says this is not easy to endure. It's not easy to endure, and I would highly recommend getting help. I think it's very, very helpful to get help to do that. Every time I've gone through one of these really, really rough spots, I have definitely been in counseling and therapy at the same time. So I'm not saying do this, gut this out, but without therapy or without a coach. But I do think that there's a way we handle it on our own time that's also very helpful, that we don't need just to save it up for the therapy appointment, go in, dump, and think that 50 minutes is going to be enough time. It's not. And it's going to happen. You're going to get caught off guard and triggered, and something's going to remind you. In fact, it was, for me this week, I heard a song. It was played. And I used to listen to this album all the time. It was one of my favorite albums. It was during the period of when I was widowed, and I would listen and find it so encouraging. In fact, I sent at least one or two of the tracks to my narcissistic ex, trying to share part of my life with him. I don't know if he ever listened or even cared to listen, But when I got into the relationship with him, I stopped listening to this artist. And it came back. It was on a TikTok live, and this guy was playing it as meditation. And like there it was, and wow, it was a flashback, and I got to crying about me, my who I was and who was gone, and But that's what I did. I sat with it. I listened to it. I talked to myself. I processed the feelings, and then I moved through it. You move through it. I'm a sci-fi fan, huge sci-fi, and I love Star Trek. So if you had a choice between Star Wars and Star Trek, I'm definitely a Trekkie. There is movies, and I know not all the movies were good, but I liked them because I'm a Trekkie. But the first movie was about how they got trapped in this big thing and near the end, and they kept trying to pull out, and they can't pull out, and they don't have enough, engine strength to do it. It was when they finally decided to move through it, to push through it, that they got to the other side. And that's what most of us do. We get into these painful places. We think, back away, get out. It's too hot. Let's, just, flee from it, run from it. But what we don't know is that we're prolonging it, and we're burning ourselves out by that. We're not processing it. So let me now turn this over to you on TikTok to talk about your questions. And I saw I had a subscriber. Thank you so much for doing that. And if you want to ask me questions, make sure to put a thumbs up in front of it. I'm sorry, Instagram, about my inability. I got to figure a better system. I have this new, beautiful 27-inch Asus monitor in front of me. So finally I have more space that I can see, but it's blocking my iPad, so I can't see it. So I got to figure out a better way, maybe move it in front. I don't know. I got to figure out something, but sorry about that until I can do that. But yeah, let me talk about a couple rules of the room. Brittany's absolutely right. We don't talk about my appearance. I know a few of you have been commenting on that. I appreciate it. I just don't know what to do with it. It makes me feel really strange. And then the second thing is politics and religion. It's not because those things aren't good things to talk about. And there's a lot to say. I know that. But this is a space that we talk about mental health issues and healthy relationships. So let's keep it to a safe place where we don't get into a discussion about that kind of. It just doesn't really lend itself to that. And if you miss part of this live and you want to see it in its entirety, please jump over to YouTube on Tuesday, and this live will be replayed in its entirety on YouTube at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. So it would be a great way for you to be able to watch it over there. So I'm watching the comments. I'm going to go back to make sure I haven't missed somebody who is a subscriber who's asking a question. And we can talk about whatever you're interested in. Obviously narcissistic abuse is a big topic for me, but it doesn't mean we can't talk about other things. So, and by the way, if you miss any live, you can go back and find them. They're like I said, they're like I do this Tuesdays and Thursdays. So Thursdays is played next week's Tuesdays, and Tuesdays will be played today. So Tuesday's live will be played today. So that's how to find them, is jump forward by one. If you can think of the schedule, and then you'll find the live that you missed. But I appreciate asking about that. Brittany, did you post the poll that you were taking? And we had a really good response last week, or on Tuesday. We were taking polls about what's your most troubling problem right now, and the question was, the issue came up was trauma bond was by far outscored everything. I'm trying to remember the other question that Brittany asked. I love how Brittany was doing that, because it's very hard for me to sort of do multitasking, to keep talking and then pay attention to all of that. So, but yeah, it was interesting to do that, to do those polls. How do you not run away from the pain? By telling yourself the pain isn't going to destroy you. It isn't going to destroy you. You think it will. You fear that it will, but it won't destroy you. It can't. Literally ask yourself, what could it do? Okay, so it gets really, really bad, and you wonder if there's any reason to continue breathing. But all right, so you just keep breathing. You just keep breathing, and even though you keep wondering, just because you feel something doesn't mean it turns into action. Action and feelings are far, far apart. You have to have an intentionality to take something that's a feeling and make it into a behavior. So I don't find any feelings that I have scary, because I know that there's such a gulf. I have to take all sorts of movement and energy and planning to make it into something intentional. So feeling is just a feeling. And yes, feelings can feel big, and they can take us into really wild places, but it's just a It burns itself out. You answer the question and you sit with it and it burns itself out. So try that. I'd love you guys to try that and come back and tell me if you've discovered that, because I think we have a lot of myths about feelings. One, we think that, and I know I've heard Brene Brown say the same thing. We tend to empower feelings by avoiding them. We act as if they're dangerous, and if they lead to bad things, and they actually don't. They can't. It's when we give ourselves permission to act on the feeling, that's problematic. But feelings don't do anything. They're just an experience or an internal experience. So test it and come back and let me know what you discover. I'd be really curious about that, and see if you find that if I'm correct. So I'm see, I love sweets. I would love to have you put your thumbs up in front of it. You're providing some very provocative comments. I'm a very spiritual person, by the way. I'm very rooted in that. If you Google me, you'll find out that my first books are devotionals. So I'm very familiar with religion and the Christianity. I'm very, very familiar with Christianity. Do I believe that culture or good spiritual practices will result in a lack of narcissism? If the person has the ability to be self-reflective and is empathic, yeah, sure, God can work with that. Sure, I see that. But here's the problem: they don't. So and anything that's has a lot of ability to control and to hold power attracts narcissistic people. I know I just said we don't talk about religion, but I want to share a story that devastated me, and I think it's a very cautionary tale. I don't know how many of you are familiar. You'd have to be in the Christian circle, evangelical Christian circle, to be aware of this. But Ravi Zachariah, he was an apologetics who went around to college campuses and preached on the sort of the depth of the Bible, sort of the depth of what the root foundation of Christianity. To me, was very impactful to my life. Made a big difference. Got me to be thinking about my relationship with God and with the Bible and with truth. But there were allegations being made. I didn't know. No, they didn't. They were kept hush hush against him, saying that he was actually a sexual predator. And then when he died, the women who were being preyed on by him actually one of them went to a journalist, got the journalist to do an exploration into this to see if the allegations were true, and they found out it was true. This man had led a double life that was horrific. Some of the worst stuff I heard. There's Epstein out there who's done very, very bad things. But this guy touted himself to be somebody that he wasn't. He was very much a wolf in sheep's clothing. So that's a perfect example of, you can know the truth. You can even be heavily rooted in it. You can teach in it. But if it does not affect you at an inside level, and you fail to see the way in which you're inconsistently presenting yourself and inconsistently living, it will not change you and it will not save you. It will not. I mean, for anybody who really is familiar with the Bible, some of the worst offenders were the religious, the Pharisees. So as much as I would love to think knowing the truth would set us free, and I do believe that's true, but we have to let it set us free. It doesn't just in itself, the knowledge in itself, we have to let it do work in us. So there's where I struggle with, spirituality is very, very important, but it doesn't solve people's depravity. The Bible says the human heart's depraved above all things. So anyway, I did not mean to get into break my own rule, but I just saw this. I love the idea. I wish the idea was true. I just know that it's not. I've seen too many people break it. Do victims tend to think all the next partners are narcissistic? Do victims, I'm reading Shal Valdez's question. Does victims tend to think all next partners are narcissistic or abusive? I don't think the victims do. I think victims think that the next partners are blind and probably being taken advantage of. Or maybe we feel like we're feeling angry with them. Oh, so can everybody see the poll? Does everybody see the result of the poll? I would be curious because it popped up on my screen what the polling is happening and what scores are coming in. So let me know if you guys are seeing that. So I don't think, I know I didn't assume. Now, my ex had been, here's the wild part about my story. The person that my ex left me for, he'd already had a relationship with. They had an ongoing relationship that actually preceded our relationship. In a way, he really betrayed her. He and her were talking. Well, there's two theories about what could have been happening. He either betrayed her and tossed her out and then got in with me, and then we ended up getting married. Or him and her were scheming against me, and the two of them were, and it was a plan. The plan was that he would marry me, get my money, and then get rid of me so that then he and her could live the life that they want. I suspect it may have been the second, not the first. But either way, I mean, so yeah, in that case, she's a really, really dark person, a very evil person, just as bad as him. But I don't think that's true of most victims. I think the subsequent victims think they think the same thing that we think. They think that they met their soulmate. They're being love bombed and deceived just like we were. And here's the other dangerous part. The partner that we were with has gotten better. They learned from us, so they're getting a more sophisticated version of what we met. So he or she's improved on their skill sets, and now they're using everything that they've learned in our relationship, and they're using it against a new person. So I feel sorry for them, honestly. I know that they're in trouble, very, very much in trouble. Don Hennessy says, and I really love this in his book, how he gets into his head. Don Hennessy is part of the law enforcement task force in Ireland, working with domestic violence partner, and for years they spent time trying to figure out what was the similarity between all victims. Was victims codependent? Were victims from troubled homes? Did victims have bad boundaries? They kind of kept trying to find something they could save victims. That was the intent. They could put some program together in treatment and help victims. What they found was there was no consistent presentation of victims. Did you get what I said? There is no consistent presentation of victims. The only commonality all victims had was that they met a predator. It wasn't the victim's personality. It wasn't the victim's history. It wasn't the victim's boundaries. It was the fact that the victims met a predator. He then goes on in this first chapter, one of the first chapters, introing this whole topic, and he says, so all of you who've not ever gotten a narcissistic abusive relationship, don't all get on your high horse and think that you're better than those who've gotten into a narcissistic abusive relationship. You're not any more sophisticated with boundaries. You don't protect yourself any better. You just got lucky. You haven't met a sophisticated enough offender. Because if you did, you would have gotten into a relationship with them, because that's how good they are. They're predators who hone the skills at getting better and better at hunting and targeting and grooming. You just got lucky and didn't run into one. I love that, because any of us who've been in this side of it as a victim knows how many times that we have been maligned for being a victim, that there is essentially something wrong with us. But when we focus on victimology and wondering what's wrong with us for getting into a relationship, what we're not looking at is we're not looking at the predator. We're not asking what's happened that's created these people that go out and then harm people like this, and how do we stop that damage? We're looking in the wrong direction. And he says, I love this is what Hennessy says in the book. He says, when you do that, when you look at victims and blame victims and put the onus of responsibility on them instead on the predators, you're colluding with the predator. You're actually augmenting and aiding and abetting what they're doing, because you're not holding them responsible. And that's what they want. They want you to do that. It's like a sleight of hand misdirection. Oh, look at that poor, pathetic person who's all broken and wounded, and they got into the relationship with me. Bad them. What red flags do they miss? Who hurt them? When we do that, we're taking our eyes off of the person who did the injury, who should have not done the injury in the first place, who should not be a bad person, should not be evil, should not be deceptive. And we're not looking at them and saying, stop doing that. We're looking in the wrong direction at the person who's bleeding. And then on top of it, we're slapping them across the face for having the bad luck of meeting a predator. Yeah, we need to reverse our thinking. And I wonder why I know I'm gotten on a soapbox, but I wonder why we're so misdirected. Part of it, I think, as a psychologist, We're afraid of being wounded. We don't like seeing victims. It scares us. So we want to then say, I'm not like you. I have it more together than you do. See, I have good boundaries. I know how to say no. I'm better at recognizing the flags. Look at my good relationships that I've been in. So I've done, you just need to get your act better. So I think we're trying to like separate ourselves. That's not me. It's not me. I don't do those things. But the sad part is, yes, you're vulnerable like the rest of us. Yes, you miss red flags too. You just got really, really lucky and met a person who wasn't that deceptive, that wasn't that exploitive. Or you're in a relationship that you're in denial about and you're not really truly looking at it. I don't know. I mean, I think both situations. And I think it's also really uncomfortable for us to look at predators because I think they scare us and we feel helpless in the face of them. I think we're not for sure what to do with them. We're not even for sure how to criminalize this behavior. It would be, wouldn't that be interesting to criminalize narcissistic abuse? I just heard, I'm trying to remember who said this, that narcissistic abuse is one of the most dangerous forms of abuse because it actually damages the brain of the victims. It causes deterioration and decompensation of the victim's level of functioning. So yeah, you can be physically abusive and you will maybe kill a person for this, but we are killing people over a long period of time through narcissistic abuse as we basically undo their personality, tear them into pieces, and then make them essentially a non-person. It's terrible. But how do you criminalize that? I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for that. I am so behind. You guys were like 100 questions out from me. So I'm going to go backwards. So Nina just asked, because you're the only one who's seen all of this. Oh, okay. She's talking to Chrissy. Sorry about that. So I'm going to go back to I'm going backwards on the questions, guys. Nina was asking, I just recently heard too much excitement or butterflies is actually a warning sign, not love. Yes, that is true. So yeah, that's a good question. How do we know that we've met somebody dangerous? How do we know? And one of them is a lot of us we mistaken excitement for attraction. So when your intuition saying something wrong, you're going to feel this shot of adrenaline that says something's going on here, and you don't always know how to interpret it. So the hard part about intuition is that it doesn't have words. That's the prefrontal cortex, or the upper part. And so it's the back part of if you think of your brain system, the stem, the center part, and the front part. And part of the intuition's tied into the gut system and the brain stem, the spinal cord. It's a very primitive old part. It's a very instinctual part. It doesn't have language. So it gives you a sense of uneasiness, something's wrong. But your front part of your brain, which reacts slower, has to decode it and say, oh, okay, I've felt this before and this is what's happening, and then put some words to it. That takes time, takes a lot of processing, and it's not fast. It's not a fast process. So part of getting better at protecting ourselves is learning to know when our intuition is being triggered and making sense of that, and knowing that it's what it is. Because sometimes we mistaken intuition for hesitancy or anxiety. For example, I'm an introvert. Going out in the evenings is super hard for me. Once I'm home and I've stopped working, I just want to veg. It's just sort of my favorite thing. So whenever somebody asks me to do something, my first take is I don't know if I want to. See, now that's not intuition. That's just hardwiring. That's me. But you have to know the difference of that from, something feels off, or you almost feel sick, like funny, weird. And you're feeling like maybe your skin crawls, or you'll have some kind of your hair rises on your arms. You sort of feel something not right, and you feel in a bind. Usually you feel for me, maybe this is not true. I'd love to know if it's true for you guys. I often feel like I'm in a bind because I know that it's a bad situation, and I know that in order for me to protect myself, I'm really telling a lot on myself now. I'm going to have to take a stand that I'm uncomfortable taking. I don't really like taking. Someone says, here, let me give you a ride. I can get you to the nearest gas station. Say you broke down by the side of the road, and you're thinking, not this person. I can't tell you why, but not this person, and maybe even it could be another woman, but you just feel like, not this person. That means you're going to have to say, no, I'm okay. Thank you very much. I'll take care of myself. And if they're really dark people, they'll often put you on a spot. Why? What's wrong? You scared of me? They'll usually up the ante on you and then put you into a harder bind so that you now really have to come out strong. And they're doing that on purpose, by the way. They're knowing that they're increasing the resistance to make you more hesitant so that you won't. That's deliberate. That's manipulativeness. If you see that, you know you've got a bad person, because people who are respectful, sensitive, they'll say, "Oh, okay, no problem, whatever, no problem." But if they push you, you know you've got a predator, because they're willing to go to places that risk shame and being called out, and they don't care. So then we need to remember that they took this risk of not caring. We should not care for their feelings either and say, "No, thank you. I'm uncomfortable. I'm not doing this." But that's the difference between intuition and instinct, or just you being you. You need to know the difference so that you can protect yourself. So that, yeah, it's very, very helpful. But well, most of us, see, here's the hard part. We've spent, especially if you're a woman, I don't know if this is true for men. Men, please let me know. But as a woman, you're actively taught not to pay attention to it. You're told over and over to override it as a child, because that means the family's got to slow down and take care of it. And we often get put in uncomfortable situations that we know probably at some level that's not really good for us. And yet, there's not, everybody's telling us to do it anyway. Like they want you to ride home with a friend after school, and this friend just got their driver's license and probably doesn't drive that well. And you're thinking, it's not a really smart plan, but all your friends like, why won't you? Why won't, I mean, we're told to override all the time. So it means we need to get better at paying attention to something that we've learned to silence and we've learned not to. And predators are planning on that. They want you to be ignoring that. They're hoping that you'll ignore that. Yeah, so the question just came in. How many of us saw red flags and missed them? 61% said, yeah, I saw them and I ignored them. And then 38% said I didn't see them. And then when it came into what are you currently struggling with, I think the top one is healing after the aftermath is the answer to this one. I would love to know why. Why did you ignore your red flags? That's a fascinating. I saw mine. I saw them and I ignored them. Partly was because I had met so few, I had been dating hard and I'd met a lot of men. So I would do what I would call one and dones. I would go out on a meet and greet. I often called them meet and greets. And over and over, these people weren't compatible. Now, I think dating these days have become very, very different. In the last couple of years, it's become very much a hookup, all about just how fast can we, get together. And it's not really looking for relationships. But back when I was first widowed, people were actually looking for relationships. But I was shocked to find how few people I had much in common with. So I was meeting a lot of guys that I had very little, anything in common. And they were nice men. I mean, really nice men, but I would strike out. And usually it was me. I mean, it wasn't that they were, like I said, dating has really changed. The environment it is now is just toxic. But when I was first widowed, it wasn't that bad. And this was in 2000 and, I was widowed in 2015. So I started dating then, and I met my ex in 2016. So I dated about a year, and yeah, nice guys. I sometimes had up to 2 to 3 dates a week. That's why anybody says, oh, it's because you can't. No, it wasn't a problem. Getting a date was not a problem. But what was a problem was finding somebody highly compatible. So when I met mine, and I heard that he'd been married several times, quite a few times. That was a big red flag. And his question, I asked him what went wrong, and his answer was terrible. It was the most lacked insight answer ever. He didn't go after them in a really horrific way, but there was no accountability, no reflection on himself at all. And then the other thing he did on that first date was he was a little pushy and domineering, but I ignored that. I just thought he was nervous. And then the last big one I saw, and I knew this was bad, was that he talked too much. And then when I tried to at least share the floor, he told me that I was stubborn. He identified my strength as stubbornness. And I thought, well, that's really odd why you would characterize it as stubbornness. But then I ignored it because I had not met such compatibility before. What I didn't know, and I didn't know anything about love bombing, never even heard the term, was that I hadn't met a real person. I didn't know that. I thought I'd met somebody really, I didn't know I'd met myself. And that's why it felt so incredibly compatible. So that's, yeah, how awful is that? So it's interesting. I'd love to know what you guys saw as red flags that you missed, and why you missed it. Here's one of the things that I recommend to help us not miss the red flags. Identify what they were, and then identify what you said or did to justify them. Like me saying, oh, his pushiness is because he's nervous. No, maybe he's pushy because he's pushy, or him calling me stubborn for being simply wanting to hold the floor. I should have seen that as, why did I overlooked it because I got desperate, because here, yeah, I'm being very vulnerable today. I got afraid that I wouldn't meet somebody so compatible because I already had maybe had met 100 men, single men in that frame of time. Really nice, like I said, really nice guys. But their lifestyle didn't match up, or their hobbies weren't, or their stage of life was wrong, or their priorities didn't line up with mine, or it was just off. They kept being off, and I was starting to feel, this is what I had not settled on. This is now what I now know, but I get afraid I'll forget it. I would love to know, do you guys get afraid you'll forget it? I hadn't come to the place of being okay with being on my own. There's the crux of the matter. I hadn't gotten okay with being single. I hadn't gotten to the place where I could say, you know what, if I'm single for the rest of my life, it's not the end of the world. I feel that today. I get panicky about the future, thinking, oof, okay, how old? I'm 60. If I lived another 30 years, do I want to spend another 30 years alone? Not really. But then I ask myself, this is how I get around the fear. There's fear. I say to myself, well, is today a bad day? Is today not a good day? Are you not happy today? Oh yeah, I'm very happy today. But all the future is, this is what I learned from having my first husband die. The future is a mirage. It does not exist. All that exists is this moment. Is this a good moment? I'm hanging out with you guys and we're having a fascinating conversation. It's a very good moment. There's nothing insufficient about this moment. There's nothing lacking about my life in this moment. It is a very good moment. All we do is we string these current present moments together, and I feel like it's almost like a necklace. We string these present moments and we create a life, our whole life. And the future is just more of these moments strung together. Good moment to good moment to good moment to good moment to good moment. If you're living fully in every moment, making the most of every moment, it's enough. I don't need to be in a relationship with somebody to make it more significant. It in itself is very good. So when I get scared about the future, I remind myself that I'm looking at something that doesn't actually exist, and what exists is this moment, and this is a good moment. But I didn't know that. When I met him, I didn't know that, and so it scared me. I thought that I would be, I don't know, it scared me. So I said, maybe this is the best it's going to be, and maybe I should go ahead and go for it. Please don't do that. Don't do that. In fact, there are people who come into as trolls and comment on my stuff like, well, you guys just don't know how to settle. No, that's the problem. When we settle, we get into trouble because we settle for people who have problems. No, we need to be okay with ourselves. Dying alone with a cat is not a problem. It really isn't. It's pretty simple. You have yourself. You're not alone. You have yourself. So that was so back to the red flags. If you identify your red flags, identify why you're vulnerable to them, what you told yourself at that moment when you saw it, why you ignored it. Some of you may have said, it's not that big of a deal. Know that you sometimes underestimate the significance of something. Maybe one of the things that you did when you saw a red flag is you said yourself, it can change, we'll grow together and we'll get better together. No, people usually don't change. And the more older we are as an adult, the less we are open to changing. You've met who you've met. They're not going to become radically different from who you met. So it's really, really important that we listen to what we say to ourselves, and so that we can then overcome what the lie is, the deception that we gave ourselves. Because that's what happened, is that we all deceived ourselves when we met this person. I I'm realizing how fast this time has gone today. Man, it's I'm going to be able to spend about another 5-10 minutes with you guys today, but then I'm going to have to head out. Today we got into some really big topics that I've really had a hard time or really love talking about. Yeah, I'm reading back what you guys said to me. Somebody said, I love cats, and honestly, that's a good life. I'm allergic to cats. I would love to have a cat. I may eventually get a dog, a little small dog, but right now I'm no pets in my life at this moment. Can anxiety come across as narcissism and be changed? I'm highly anxious and it overtakes me. Sometimes anxiety certainly can be egocentric. I mean, when you're anxious, you're afraid, you're all about your own world and trying to manage it and keeping safe. It's not, but anxiety doesn't always lack self-reflection. Usually, it's almost too much. It's sort of like you're hyper aware of yourself to the point that you're catastrophize. I can't say that word. You're, you know what I mean. You're catastrophizing. There it is. Catastrophizing. You're catastrophizing. It's almost too much thought that's happening, not enough thought. But it can look, I think, high levels of anxiety when you start to be protective of yourself can look like entitlement and being special, but it isn't. It's a very, very different process. Now, the challenge is, Tucker, is that anxiety is a mental health condition and narcissism is a personality disorder, and they're actually two very different things. They can co-occur. So someone can be very, very anxious and also be narcissistic. That's very, very feasible. So I would almost look at it separately. Are you highly anxious? Look at some indicators that would say that, and then really ask yourself if you have also the indicators for narcissism. And they're harder to see than the narcissistic ones because you don't tend to have not good self-reflection. So it's very, very hard to see all of that. Do I offer one-on-one Zoom sessions? I do offer a one-time clarity call. I'm not taking any counseling clients these days, so I don't see anybody on an ongoing basis. But if you're struggling with what's direction, maybe for example, Tucker, I'm not suggesting this, but somebody in Tucker's position, you might want to what do you think if you sit down with me alone and talk to me? Can you give me direction? That would be a great way to use the session. Sometimes people just even want to know, does this sound like narcissism? Or I'm in the throes of a trauma bond and I don't know what to do next, but they just want some direction. And what I'm really happy to do is I want to make sure that when you come to me that we know what you need and that by the end you walk away with that. So often I'll follow up with an email with some, you might think of this kind of thing, resources, or here's some coaching, or here's an online course, or here's a support group that might be really helpful for you. But generally I try to point you in directions of things that I know are useful and not just mine. Yes, of course, I always try to market myself, but I really try to keep my ear to the ground of what others are doing so that if it's a really good resource, I would be happy to send you in those directions. Very, very happy. Yeah, I'm kind of going back and making sure I'm not missing, especially subscribers' questions. Subscribers, please be sure to send me questions in between the lives so that I can answer your questions on the next live. So I followed you on TikTok. Now I know there's a new subscriber. I will go follow you after I get done here. But make sure you send me a question and I will randomly pull one out and answer it. I will have this is a subscriber live question period. And we'll make sure that we talk specifically about whatever your question is. That's a perk for you being a subscriber of mine. And thank you so much for that. So Beyond Living Lifestyle wants to know, how do we handle a narcissist? How do we handle a narcissist we can leave like an in-law? I'm not for sure I follow your question. Oh, are you asking how do you handle an in-law who's a narcissistic? Is that what you're asking? I'm trying to follow exactly what you're asking. Why do I feel so guilty when I'm hurting? I'm going to pop into that question. Oh, okay. That's what you're asking. How do you handle an in-law who's narcissistic? I heard the fascinating conversation about this. I'm trying to remember who talked about this. And I really agreed with it. So I can't take credit, but it's really, really agreed with it. When we have a partner has family member, so our partner's family member, parent, one of the parents is a narcissist, essentially we've now gotten into a relationship with 3 people because our partner is going to be doing a lot of caretaking of that narcissistic parent. They're going to do a lot to try to keep that parent happy. So they've not really made a full alignment with you. They've made an alignment with you partly, but they also want to make sure they don't lose this family connection, and it may be a real loss. It could be a real loss. The challenge is for you to be able to identify that and hope that your partner is also identifying it and sees it and begins to realize what's happening, because especially if it's a mother-in-law, they're going to do everything they can to ostracize you to have a special relationship with their son and keep you on the outs. They're going to try to put a wedge in your relationship, and you need to be very, very aware of that and very alarmed about that. Now, the trick is how to get the partner to see it, because they've grown up in this and they often don't even know there's a problem because it's just what always is. They don't have any outside perspective. That's when I think counseling is very helpful, very pivotal, to just the counseling for the two of you to talk about this dynamic. But be prepared that in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of resistance, because this person has lots of training to be compliant to this parent. They've also know that there's risking connections with the family if they start to break the rules. And they just, that's what they know. And so they're going to feel like more like you're the outsider instead of the fact that you and this person, your partner, are really not the outsider. You're the relationship. It's tricky. It's super tricky. I witnessed it with my own parents. My mother-in-law did this with my father and mother. It was horrible. It was horrible. And then I witnessed other relationships and experienced a little bit of it myself. For me, it took years, but near the end, my late husband saw the dynamics and started siding with me better. But it was painful to feel like I was chronically the outsider. So the question becomes, what will you do about that? Whether or not you can tolerate it, whether or not it means that you need to take a stand and start to, I don't know. I mean, yeah, sometimes comes down to divorce when the partner chooses his family over your relationship. But it's a terrible situation. That's why what I said to my sons just recently who haven't married, and I said to them, remember, when you marry someone, you don't just marry a person, you're marrying a family. And all that family dynamics that go with it. You need to make sure the family dynamics are what you can live with. And they said, no, I'm marrying. No, you're not. You're marrying a family. You're not marrying the person. And that family's they're going to dictate what happens around holidays, and they're going to dictate even around your wedding, what happens there. And they're going to have opinions about your children and what you do with vacations. I mean, it's huge. Their impact on you is huge. So please be very, very aware when you're assessing the fit of somebody, you assess the fit of the family. And especially when there's toxicity, it's hard to see in the beginning because they also love bomb you. So you don't always know the truth when you meet the family. Sometimes that takes time. Best tip off I could think of how to recognize it is watch for triangulation. If there's a lot of back talking about each other, that's not a good sign. That's a pretty unhealthy family dynamic. Also, watch for how they're treating the other in-laws. Hopefully there are other ones who are already married. How is that going? There's, in the case of my situation, there was already problems with the couples that got married ahead of us. There was already problems. I could see it. So that warned me. Now, granted, I was 21, so what did I know about anything? I didn't really know to be aware of all of this, but there was definitely signs. I could see it. So... all right, this has been really, really wonderful. I feel like I haven't gotten through a lot of your questions today. We did a lot of talking, but I'll be back on Tuesday at 1 p.m. Central Time. Consider if you want to be in the private group, Toxic Free Relationship Group. We're going to be taking the Big 5 Personality Inventory and Saturday reviewing it. We're going to be actually reviewing it. Oh, the guilty question. Yeah, I did see that question. Let me go ahead and finish that. So why do you feel so guilty? Well, because thank you. That's a great tie into my Toxic Free Relationship Club. You're feeling guilty because you're a person who has a lot of high integrity. And not everybody does, by the way. You think everybody has high integrity, but they don't. Everyone varies on that. It's a trait. Some of us have very low internal integrity, and others of us are very conscientious, very high integrity, and we follow the rules. We're very aware of social justice. Chances are you are. And therefore, then you take responsibility for the outcome of what happens around you, including the toxic partner. I certainly, on that test, a Big Five test, I score like 96 percentile on conscientiousness. I have a lot of social justice, a lot of integrity. I'm very governed by my commitments. It means a lot to me. So that's why you're feeling guilty, is because it's who you are. It's how you run your life. They've, by the way, anybody you meet who's a narcissist, they do not have conscientiousness. They would score nearly nothing. And most of them have very limited consciences. So as a result, they have very limited internal integrity. That's why they break all these rules, and they're very hypocritical and very paradoxical, is because they go by whatever they're feeling. They don't have any kind of ethics that they govern their life with. They do whatever feels right in the moment and whatever's their best advantage. Yeah. So remind yourself of that. When you start to feel guilty, remind yourself that you've met somebody who does not have a conscience, does not care about how they impact you, and they're using you, parasitically using that quality against you to get you to do what they want. They're actually exploiting it. That should make you mad. So that's how I get around it. When I start to feel guilty, I realize I'm being exploited, and it makes me mad. You're not guilty for bad behavior. You didn't make this person do this. They were abusive on their own. So you're not accountable for them having a rough go just because you've discarded them. They should never have been bad. Then this wouldn't be happening. The behavior never happened. You wouldn't be making these choices. That's all on them. That's how I work my way around it and out of it. So back to the Toxic Free Relationship Club on Saturday, we're going to be reviewing that test, Big Five personality test, talking about these traits, and they're called super traits, with Sandra Brown. So if you're interested, see the link in my bio to be able to join us and learn more about that. Also, it's a great place for support, just really awesome support. And I'll be back on Tuesdays at Central Standard Time at 1 p.m. And also don't check out my podcast. And right now I'm going to hop over to YouTube and hang out with everybody over there who we're going to review what we just talked about on Tuesday. So if you weren't here on Tuesday and you want to hear more of this or ask me questions, I talk about other topics over on YouTube. We just chat. I'd be happy to chat with you. So, all right, you guys.